Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the ConTech.Live webinar. It's actually our first fireside chat. I'd like to welcome Sami Benchekroun from Mauritius. I'm Clive Snell from ConTech.Live. We today are going to tackle the subject: is the traditional academic conference dead? And that's we could have a yes/no to that, and then just go to have a drink. But I think there are so many issues that are wrapped up in that subject. So we're very excited to welcome Sami to a ConTech.Live event. Not the first time, but we know that he has a lot of very interesting and hopefully controversial opinions on the subject. We're using Zoom webinar, so your currently mics will all be muted. But there's a Q&A button down at the bottom. Please do throw in comment questions or in the chat. We'll try and tackle those as we go, because this is meant to be a conversation. So, and if we miss anything, we'll pick it up at the end. We're going to run half an hour. We'll see how we go. We may extend that a little bit, but that's largely down to how it goes. So let's kick off. I'm going to start by let's just talk very quickly about what is a traditional academic conference. So answer that one, Sami.
Yeah, well, you're starting with the most difficult one at first, right? So first of all, thank you very much for having me. This is really great. I'm looking forward for the next time as we are really in front of at a fireside right now. I'm heating myself with a computer here. So again, thank you for having me. So what is an academic conference? Well, what I like to see it is we always like to kind of differentiate around the conversation that is happening around research and science just in general. And that is a conversation that happens all year long, right? You have these conversations in
Sure.
institutions, in research labs and so on. And then at some point, you have a 3 or 4 day, some sort of a agglomeration of different stakeholders around one topic to exchange in a very condensed manner, the research, right? And you do that with scientific posters, with presentation, you have a large exhibition, you have an exchange happening, network sessions. So this is what I would consider a traditional conference. Yeah. I think that's about it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think just to sort of to tune it up a bit, I think there are two kind of issues. The first one is COVID. COVID has basically stopped everything. We just had an announcement yesterday in the UK that pretty much our kind of not quite lockdown situation where you can't hold really big meetings of any sort at all is now going to run for another 6 months. So we've had 6 months, so we're going to be 12 months without any real face-to-face meetings. COVID has stopped this stuff, and that's kind of prompted this conversation. However, I would wind that back and say the traditional word in the academic conference subject here is, it's been around a long time. It's not really changed in many, many years. And technology and the world and the way content is produced has changed dramatically. And, so there's two things. It's changed because you can't run them at the moment. So what's going to happen? But it was changing anyway. And, how do you feel about that? I mean, what is your take on all of that?
Yeah. So let's really look into the past, and I like your take on that. So if we look very back in the days, you had these projectors, right? These overhead projectors with your slides, right? And the storytelling around that was very linear, right? Everybody needed to come, and you had a very clear storytelling on a slide by slide basis. And then computers emerged and PowerPoint emerged. But the question, and I always like to say that when it comes to PowerPoints, where's the power and where's the point, right? It really stayed the way it always was, in a very linear way of communication. And also before the COVID crisis, people came to conferences, people traveled all around the world, and in their backpack, they had a USB key to plug it into a computer, and they printed out posters to hang on the walls, right?
Yeah.
So this way of storytelling was quite flat. So I didn't really see it. You know, you talked about an evolution. I didn't really see one. And I think there was just slight changes here and there that happened, right? There were a couple of people saying, right, we need e-posters, or we need some sort of an educational platform to exchange. And I think that idea of a new type of conference, so not a traditional, but a new thought academic conference with much more connectivity, with a conversation that would happen all year long, with more interaction, with much more participation from around the world, you know, that only, you know, people start thinking about that only now. So the crisis, in a sense, as an acceleration of innovation, right? You know, a forced acceleration. So in a sense, if you will, I think we really need to rethink, and we need to be fast in rethinking before a vaccine is out. Everybody is starting to do the same things again, right? So really,
yeah. Well, I think that's, yeah, I can see that happening. I mean, everyone says this is the new normal, and the reason that they kind of identify that in that way, I think, is in their heart of hearts, many people would just like life to go back to the way it was.
Yeah.
And so you know, I think there is a catalyst in COVID which raises the issues, but I also think the other side of that argument is there are conference organizers like ourselves who, I mean, I've been involved in conferences for 25, 30 years probably, and they can be very lucrative, and you don't want to let go of some of that. There is a whole raft of academic institution built around these conferences to do with progression, to do with jobs, to do with getting published, all of those things that I think are very dear to people. And you know, there is a conservatism built in to many people's view that wouldn't it be great to get back to doing stuff the way we always have. However, I would layer over that, you know, let's really tackle this question that, you know, what are the real costs of attending these conferences, and who's paying? You know, what will the real lasting impact presenting at this conference be? Because you're never quite sure who's exactly attending, because that will also be determined by not necessarily the interests of science, but more the interests of the individuals and the money. And what is the real ROI of attending that conference? So those are the issues that I think are also relevant in, you know, maybe it's time to take some of these walls down and rebuild them.
Oh yeah. Well, so I don't know, you know, so in one of the first contexts where I've presented, you know, I made that scheme of science and exchange happening, and in a kind of a black box, and then suddenly everything comes out. 2-3 days is the conversation, and it's silent again, and we're waiting again for that. So it comes in waves. So all of the topics that you are mentioning right now are in a sense built into that schema of silence, you know, big happening, 3-4 days of wow, silence, 3-4 days happening of wow. So what I believe is, you know, we all need to look at it, and especially with conference organizers around the world, is that there's a real opportunity. So you mentioned the term ROI, you mentioned the term of, you know, impact in a sense. There's a huge opportunity to actually not get back to where we were before. And to really use this dynamic to accelerate on all fronts when it comes to innovative approaches, right? So just to give you a couple of examples, right? I strongly believe that the in-person exchange is highly relevant. And I think that in some way or the other, there's an in-person exchange that is going to come back. I love the direct exchange. I think it's necessary. I think drinking a beer at the bar is very important for also knowledge exchange. I think we all support that. and for inspiration, you know, I'm a big fan of getting inspired by you know, and by traveling to other locations. So I think that is a very important component. But what I really don't want to miss out is the constant conversation that is happening all year long. That exchange of knowledge, that exchange of interaction, and quite frankly, the this great advantage of wandering around an exhibition floor and finding out about new products, about new new businesses that are out there, right? So I think what we are now is we have that unique opportunity to say, let's create a stream of conversation around that community of a society, a company, a topic, whatever it is, and kind of create a constant flow of communication where exhibitor can still showcase their ideas, their products, get a constant value, not only on a 3-day event, a constant value, and still on top have then some sort of an event where we meet and where we have a different quality. So I just met with a good friend of mine who's in the industry for a very long time, and we're always debating about this idea of creating experiences on site is highly relevant, and it became just more relevant. So now we need to really focus on the experience that happens on site, but let loose of all the content and all that heaviness of the conference and put that online, as it's so much easier to actually exchange online all year long. So, I've put all of your thoughts that you've mentioned into kind of a long answer, but I really hope we'll use that to leapfrog over what we are seeing right now. And what we see right now is a lot of testing. We see virtual floors, right? 3D avatars walking through an exhibition floor. We see all of that. And we see, that this is a test. Everybody is kind of shocked of conferences are falling apart. So we are in a testing phase. So I very much hope that we'll come to a point during the time of crisis where we have a much better kind of mixture between on-site experience and an online communication.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think people come to events to share ideas. I think they come to forge collaborations, and I think they come to make connections. Those are all the things that you talked about, but in many ways, a lot of the content stuff around that, the posters, the presentations, and all the rest of it are kind of, they're kind of a background that you almost could, like you say, have in a different way, in a different format, and there's many opportunities to share that way, using technology. So I think what we are now talking about, and it's at the heart of the ConTech mission, is to talk about digital transformation. So we basically, at last, face-to-face events need to have digital transformation. We're just talking about our own personal experience for one moment. We've built the whole idea of taking our ConTech event from a 2-day event to a week, shorter sessions on days, revised pricing, lots of ways of actually doing the connections and the engagement. But the whole process will be translatable to exist next year or the year after, against the backcloth of having face-to-face events at the same time, where there's more theatre, there's more opportunity to do interesting stuff, there's more opportunity for that connection, collaboration, and idea sharing. We are right on the edge of it. I mean, personally, I hate avatars. I put that out there. I think avatars are just a joke. I mean, you can try them if you like. My view on that is, I remember Second Life, which is now just disappeared and was going to be the future. But anyway, that's come.
It's a very interesting point, and I would love to touch on two things of what you've just said. One being, I strongly believe, and we see that on our daily experience, right? We are in conversations with a lot of conference organizers, people organizing virtual sessions, a lot of virtual sessions, a lot of virtual conferences. We receive a lot of RFPs, and we can really see what is being asked for right now, quite in a live approach. So what we see, so in terms of exhibition and in terms of in terms of how the experience is within a virtual experience, I think we can learn a lot from what has been already out there before. So, we can learn a lot about, from online marketing. We can learn a lot about from social media. We can learn a lot from other areas that have solved the challenge. And I think that is a very relevant element here, is to not try to copy exactly what worked in an in-person event and kind of transfer that online. I think that's really the wrong approach.
Yeah.
I think that we always need to start asking, why, what is the reason we did in person what we did? So what is the reason for an exhibition, right? Well, exhibitors and sponsors wanted to bring the products to the customers, right? It's some sort of a lead generation element. So if we really think about the questions, we quickly come to the point to understand that to just copy things from the offline world to the online world just does not work, right? And I think that we are in a process of finding out the right way. So how can we connect that networking element into this consumption of content? How can we offer our exhibitors and sponsors a really good way to engage with the attendee, and so on and so forth, which is, and I'm repeating myself, not a replication of what we see online.
Sure.
And quite frankly, if you look, for example, in the first iPhone, I like that example, the leather optic in the notes book. It was a replication of what we are known, of what we know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It didn't survive, right? Right now, our iPhone and all really great digital products are born digital. Coming from a world where software engineers looked at the real challenges. What is the challenge? What is the question that we need to answer? And we are not there yet. So just because we have now avatars walking through the red doesn't really solve the real problems.
No, that's why
that was solved with the virtual world. And maybe just to add, I don't want to talk too much here, but maybe one element that I want to mention that you touched on is the amount of content, and is the amount of data that suddenly is there for us to improve things, right? The in-person meeting was great for the connection, was great for the exchange, for the gin tonic, and so on and so forth, but was not really great to understand and to have a data-driven approach on what are the areas of interest. What is the path is that people walk through? It's very tough to actually, answer these questions. In an online world, you can actually answer these questions. You know exactly how often people click on dedicated sessions. Yeah. You know exactly how often or how long a session has been visited. So suddenly you have that wealth of knowledge for dedicated content in order to improve it, quite quickly. You can even, on day one of your virtual conference, make changes for day two of your conference.
Yeah.
Well, in the in-person world, you couldn't do it. So I really urge everybody that organizes conferences, and not only academic conferences, general conferences. I really urge everybody to stick and to understand all that great value that this digital component can bring us, also from an ROI perspective, by the way, because data is something that can be translated into ROI, and then create this wonderful experience on site, but connected to the digital world. So I think that this is really the big question. How can we do that? And there's good approaches, right? So I don't want to advertise for ourselves, but we are in constant conversation with our partners on how to create these great experiences. And there are solutions. There's a lot of great solutions, and I think that that should stay for
I think that's right. I mean, it's a philosophical view. You've got to look at what people really, really go to events for. And then you have got to try and work that into the platform and take the platform and say, right, well, and that isn't replicating a drink at the bar. Diane Lindsay, one of our attendees, has said it'd be sad if a chat at the bar was still an essential part of sharing research. Yeah. I kind of agree with that. On the other hand, I still think a chat at the bar is really important, because that's one of the things that people do. You can't have a chat at the bar virtually, but there may be another way. I mean, we're working very hard sort of with our ConTech event to come up with ways where corridor conversations and means of just bumping into people, serendipity, or being pointed in a particular direction, which does happen at events. So you kind of meet with like-minded people, you meet with kindred spirits, because that's a really important element. But it isn't about building an avatar and wandering around a kind of a fake floor, you know?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So it's, again, the purpose of that moment of serendipity, and I like that, I really love that for in-person meetings, is something that can be replicated, or that can be, and I'm trying to not use the word replicated, but that can actually happen online, right?
Yeah,
and there's great examples for the past. So why shouldn't we use that for the future? But it's still, I think, you know, coming back to our initial question, is the traditional academic conference dead? Well, you know, the academic conference is not that. It's more important than ever. The exchange around academia and science is more important than ever. But I think emphasizing on the word traditional, well, I think there is something to it that we highly need to rethink it. That there needs to be a complete shift in thought process. And right now, I unfortunately see just that replication process, you know, that we want the same thing online. You know, that's what we see. And I don't believe that. I think we really need to step outside that and think outside that box, ask the question, understand that data is key, and so on, right? So I really hope that will be something that people will adapt, because I believe also that essentially the exchange around that, you know, what I would love to do, what I call early stage research, that the exchange happening online, you know, create some sort of a democratization also to the exchange, right? Suddenly, the entire world can participate in the dialogue, right? So a conference that with 20,000 participants that happens in the States every year can suddenly also have participants from, you know, Africa, South America, you know, Asia, and so on. So more people will have access to that kind of knowledge. So I think having all of these elements in mind, we really need to think about that. And we haven't even touched talking about ecological elements, right?
No,
so,
of course.
You know, so that is yet another topic. So why don't we think more in hubs? Why don't we think less in massive annual meetings? Why don't we say, well, there's maybe a little bit reduced, but there's a massive online component around that annual meeting. And then there's smaller hubs around the world, right? Where the exchange goes on. So I think we can still, you know, we should be, you know, tough now to say, hey, you know, let's try things out. Let's open up our you know, thought process and be active there. Yeah?
I totally agree. I mean, there are so many more things you can do. Just thinking about our own events, you know, it didn't take us long to work out, let's try and make it more sympathetic to more time zones, because we have a lot of people who would normally travel. No one's going to travel, but we can do that. And, you know, we can also record things if we want to, certainly for, you know, very instant consumption shortly afterwards. I think all of those things are really important. I mean, I still think I'm a heartfelt believer in face-to-face eventing. I think face-to-face events could be far more exciting once they've been through some of these processes. I mean, it's interesting. I just sort of did a little bit of reading before we started. And there's research which shows that innovation blooms when people get together. You know, there's positive suggestion that physical proximity drives scientific progress, you know, by putting people in different rooms together and so on and so forth. You have kind of computer hacks where people get really excited together and they create stuff that would never have been thought of. And I actually think if you step away from that, you think, well, that's been a great excuse to kind of almost create a bit of a gravy train in the traditional academic conference. We've got to preserve all of those things, but we can now do it so many different ways. And I think that's one of the most important elements.
You're definitely right. What I just struggled in what you've said is that element of face-to-face. I had an interesting conversation lately where someone said, well, isn't that face-to-face? You know, isn't that a conversation? You know, why do we value the physical face-to-face different than that face-to-face, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that also the, so I try to, I think the moment we really kind of understand why that physical, is it really about that face-to-face in a physical, or is that, what's the value of the physical? Is it maybe the experience? Is it maybe the fact that we're, that the surrounding is interesting? Is it maybe that, we do interesting activities together that sparks our interest? So I think that slicing everything down to the very end question, what is the purpose of dedicated activities? And the moment we are more purpose driven and really understand the purpose of all these activities that we're doing, and then answering the question accordingly, I think then that's the moment when the overall experience, physical, in person, on site, and digital virtual components can perfectly fit together and be very nicely intertwined.
It's interesting how long kind of academic conferences have taken to get round to this, really, and the fact we have to have a kind of a global pandemic to really be the catalyst. Because I mean, my personal background in directory publishing, in magazine publishing, so on and so forth, we went through decades of trying to replicate what a magazine was until you realized actually, online you can do so many more different things and you can create things from scratch, and digital native publications emerged that were far smarter, but didn't really take anything away at the end of the day from a paper magazine. Sami, we've got a question from an anonymous attendee. I'm not sure I can really answer this. You may have a view. What level of engagement have you seen at virtual exhibition booths during the summer, autumn virtual congresses? Has it met the expectations of exhibitors, and how do you see virtual booths evolving?
Yeah, well, great question. And I think that the answer to that, there's no one answer. And I think the reason for it is that there is just a lot of different ways of creating exhibitor booths. So we've done a lot of analysis. We've looked into a lot of different virtual conferences, different ways of doing that, and it came down to basically two dedicated approaches. We've seen the world of virtual exhibition floor where you really need to walk through, or where you have a floor map and then you click on dedicated exhibitors, and there's some sort of a collateral. And then there is this approach of integrating the exhibitor and the sponsor more into the overall experience. And what we have seen is, if you separate the exhibitor into a dedicated kind of floor map, a flat floor map, where you click on logos, the excitement about that is not really high, because essentially you could also as well go to their website and find out more about what's going on, right? So we haven't seen so much engagement around that end. Where we have really seen a lot of engagement is when the exhibitor and the sponsor contributes to the overall value of the virtual meeting. With, for example, sponsored sessions, or great content that they deliver, or a stronger presence with maybe banners or colorful playing arounds within the session program, and so on and so forth. So the moment we integrate the sponsors and exhibitors much more into the virtual program, we see a higher engagement, and that engagement and the kind of contact to dedicated leads excels the engagement in a physical in-person meeting by far, because also the attendees are just much, they're all going through basically the session. And in an in-person meeting, not everybody is going the same path as through the exhibition. So again, that's, again, the question, what is the sponsor exhibitor looking for? And then answering that in a born digital way. That would be my answer.
You see, I very much agree with that. I hate to be over negative, but I kind of see virtual exhibition stands in the same town as avatars. I often felt that when we got online sophistication, and as the World Wide Web really migrated to 2.0 and became much more interactive, you kind of got an inbuilt exhibition stand exhibition there and then, you know, but it's not to do with managed communities. It's not to do with engagement on that level. It's not to do with subjects. And I think there are all sorts of ways of incorporating digital presence for sponsors and exhibitors that don't look like a traditional. It comes back to the same thing. Let's not rebuild what we've already got, in a physical environment.
Yeah.
We have another comment from Dion. Dion says, I suspect one of the great opportunities of COVID and digital workshops conferences is for heightened levels of real-time participation at conferences where attendees have the opportunity to become participants. Is the academic conference any different from the general conference in this respect? What is he saying there? I kind of, yeah, well, I don't think it is very different.
You think it is different?
No, I don't think it is.
No, exactly. So I actually wanted to also, in your comment before, you said it took academic conferences so long. I must say it is quite replicatable to every conference.
Oh,
right?
no, I agree. I agree.
So, you know, I'm constantly at the PCMA conference that always happens in January, and there's the PCMA, which is all these wonderful conference organizers, and the challenges are quite uniform. I think that one difference about academic conference is really the wealth of content that is shared, and the importance of that content that is shared that needs to be more integrated into the overall academic ecosystem. So I think it's quite similar.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, I think what we can learn from all of these things is, you know, in media generally, in communications and in information, digitization is a relatively simple process. Digital transformation is a far bigger process, where you're building things from a kind of a digital native perspective. And
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
That's got huge extra potential on where we've come from when you think about it.
Yeah. And again, the main message is, let's use the time wisely that we have, and let's make the right decisions, and to not kind of too fast go into, you know, I'm going to do fast a one-time virtual conference, but really think about it long term and say, how can we perfectly align that with the purpose and the mission of our institution, society, or whatever it is.
Exactly. It's like everything else, and you got to have a very clear objective, and you've got to be very understanding of what you're trying to deliver for people. And it is this desire, I think, to engage in a community of interest, whatever you want to call it. Sami, I think that's been brilliant. We've had half an hour. We've not got any more questions. We've kind of reached a natural pause of, we think it's kind of, if it's not dead, it's on life support. And we really do believe that the scope and the opportunity is enormous. But let's not try and reinvent where we've been. Let's start thinking about those fundamentals of bringing people together to learn, to engage, to connect, and to make collaboration. And let's do that in a new way.
Definitely.
That when we can get back, if we want to, physically, that will all fit together as well.
That's true. Yeah.
Sami, thanks for your time. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending. I just want to give a very quick plug to our next event, which is in 2 weeks' time. Nancy Roberts, the CEO of Umbrella Analytics, is going to talk about auditing your output for diversity of representation. It's a really interesting subject, fascinating topic. Nancy's also speaking at ConTech Week, talking about using AI to create ethical and inclusive content. A fabulous session. And if you haven't yet, I would urge all of you to go to our website, have a quick look at our program, which is now 99% complete. Registration's open, and we are very keen to see as many of you in November for our online conference. And you can judge me and my colleagues of what we deliver then, and maybe refer back to some of this. I'm sure we'll do this kind of thing again, Sami. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you for everyone for coming, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Well, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Bye-bye.